Hello, Dr. Cath here again, and today we're going to talk about autumn bounty. And this is the wonderful richness and variety of fruits that we can find in our hedgerows around the countryside at this time of year. Now, nothing really beats the satisfaction of getting home from an autumn walk with a bag full of sweet ripe fruits ready to turn into stores for the winter. It takes us right back to our prehistoric past. The need to stock up for cold months ahead, something sweet that'll make me feel good in those cold months. Because nowadays, only really squirrels and voles have to do that sort of thing. We can buy strawberries all year round in the supermarket. But it's a great way to get in touch with the changing seasons and the bounty nature offers at this time of year. And of course, a variety of tastes and the freshness of the fruit and the vitamins they include. A lot of them have really good levels of antioxidants and are really good for you. So have a think about it and get out there and do some foraging. Because right back in the dim and distant past of time when we were all hunter-gatherers, it would have been a vital thing to have stored dried fruit or fruits preserved in fat to give you that vitamin C through the winter. And foraging didn't go out of fashion when everybody finished being hunter-gatherers and started being farmers back with the Neolithic. It was still just as important. And fruits and nuts were gathered as a normal thing. It wasn't sort of, it's not a new fact. This was standard, and it went on right through to the sort of 18th and 19th century. People would gather fruits, so it dropped out of fashion a bit. The Victorian gardeners were very good at growing fruits in the garden. Fruit was imported. The need wasn't there, so the wealthier people really moved on to bought fruit. For the poorer households, though, it went on being equally vital. It was only really after the Victorian period that people were buying preserves, but it was normal in my grandparents' day and for my mother to make fruits jams and jellies in the right season. It became really important during wartime because, of course, the import of fruit was severely compromised by the danger to shipping. So it was encouraged again. The sugar ration was increased from 8 ounces to 16 ounces per person per week to allow people to preserve the fruit. Jam was rationed. You only got £1 per person for 2 months. So it was a great thing to do. Mixed berry jams were very popular because you couldn't always gather together enough fruits of a single kind to make a batch. So lots of wartime recipes for mixed berry jam, hedgerow jam. And the Ministry of Food actually published a leaflet, number 5, which was Hedgerow Harvest, encouraging people to go out and pick fruit and make preserves for the winter with it. You're being part of history if you go out and do it. Of course, in a good year, a lot of plants produce really heavy crops of fruit or seed, and the amount the odd forager would harvest is unlikely to have any great impact on that. But do remember that many wild creatures depend on fruits and seeds to fatten themselves up for the winter, for hibernation. Dormice, squirrels, also voles, they don't hibernate, but they still want to fatten up. So don't be too greedy and leave plenty for them. Now, while many fruits are tasty and full of vitamins, there are a few that are quite poisonous. So do check the identification of everything you find, and if you're in any doubt at all, leave it be. These are yew berries, of course. Actually, the flesh isn't poisonous, but the seed is. So, but one to leave alone. Um, Anything that is on a climbing plant is better left alone. The bryonies are very poisonous. The nightshades are very poisonous. Um, Most of the tree fruits are okay, but there's a few to avoid, like dogwood and spindle and holly. So make sure you know what it is, make sure you know it's edible, and don't pick anything you're in any doubt at all about. Do take the children with you, but make sure they're aware of the dangers and know not to eat anything without your say-so. Some of the tastiest looking fruits are harmful. So obviously, it's not a good idea for it to forage next to a busy road, partly for the danger of being run over, and also because the fruits might have been covered by exhaust fumes and dust and things like that. So quiet lanes are fine, and busy roads are really not a good idea. Obviously, you'll want to wash the fruit, but wash them just before you use them, and use them or preserve them or freeze them as soon as you possibly can. Throw away any that don't look very nice, they look a bit mouldy, shriveled, bug infested, that sort of thing. And don't forget, you need to get the permission of the landowner to access privately owned land and harvest fruit there. It's a good idea to pick your fruit into a basket or a plastic tub, and pick it when it's dry. This avoids it getting crushed, and plastic bags are really bad because you invariably get them hooked on a thorn or a bramble, rips the bottom out of the bag, you've lost the whole lot. Damp fruit tends to go mouldy quickly, so pick it dry, pick it in a basket. And if you don't get enough in one session, most of the fruits will freeze nicely until you've gathered enough. The joy of a basket full of fruit is fantastic. I was reading the wartime book Wild Foods of Britain by Jason Hill. It was published in 1941, and he has a wonderful suggestion. He thinks a hooked stick is a good thing to take with you to reach higher branches and brambles and pull them down so you can reach the fruit. And he says, a hooked stick about 2 feet long will be handy for gathering fruit, and one made from peeled blackthorn, which looks and feels like old ivory, makes an elegant present for the housewife, and with a deep, well-shaped basket is a hint that can scarcely be ignored. But there you go. If you want to drop a hint to somebody, a well-shaped basket and a nice hooked stick is just the thing. You'll want to preserve your wild fruit. It doesn't keep very well as it is, so the tradition was either to bottle it or to make it into jams or jellies. You can also make chutneys, pickles, cheeses, wines, liqueurs, all sorts of things you can do with it. Good recipes are easily available in books or online. Plenty of books in the library about it. And once you know the basic methods, you can experiment with all sorts of different fruits according to what you've got available. Now, jams and jellies form because of a chemical reaction, and that's between a substance called pectin, which is present in the fruit, and sugar, and also the fruit acids. And the pectin and the acids tend to be most concentrated when the fruit isn't quite ripe, but then the flavour is only partly developed. So the best time to pick fruit is when it's just ripe. Try to avoid the overripe fruit and don't pick it underripe. So with blackberries, if they snap easily off the twig, they're ready to eat. They just come away in your hand. And most of the fruits are like that. If they come away in your hand, they're ready to eat. Jellies are a really good way to use pippy fruits and things that like, and personally I find blackberries fine, but some people don't like the pippiness of them. Rosehips, certainly you need to strain them properly. We'll come on to them a bit later, but making jellies is a great way of doing it. You can either rig up your own homemade jelly straining apparatus like this one, or you can buy stands with jelly bags that fit in them. Either way will work fine. You can also make fruit leather, which makes a really nice, useful snack to carry with you. It's more a keep indefinitely, as it's a sort of almost dry product. And this is, again, the pulp is sieved and then boiled down and spread and dried. So what we're going to be gathering, archetypal thing everybody knows about is blackberries, and because what blackberries grow on is called a bramble. The blackberry is just the fruit, and they're very common in hedgerows. Left on its own, it'll make a great tangled mass of bramble, and it's very variable. There's over 300 microspecies of blackberries in the UK alone. So have a taste. They will taste different. Different areas will have better tasting ones, and people who are keen on foraging tend to know where the best tasting blackberries are and not tell anybody else. So find out where the best ones are with the best flavour and keep it to yourself. So we've got this tangle of prickly branches, and you've got sort of 3-lobed leaves on them, and the 3 leaves radiating out from a stalk. And in the springtime, they've got white or pink flowers, and then come this time of year, they've got these lovely little blackberries, segmented fruits. So each of those globes has a little pip in it, and when they come away from the twig, the core stays in them, not like a raspberry. So don't wait for the core to come away, because it's never going to happen. They'll just come up in your hand. You can find them in gardens and woodlands and hedgerows and waste ground and roadsides and parks and all sorts of places. So it's a very common thing. It's an extremely good survivor, and the fruit is lovely eaten raw, or you can cook it, make it into pies and puddings and things, jams, jellies, syrups, vinegars, wines. It's endless. It's one that's very good for you. It's been used to treat digestive and urinary tract disorders, sore throats, mouth ulcers, hemorrhoids, wounds, all manner of things. And you can make a good blue dye out of the fruit. So it's useful. They even made cordage, like rope, out of the stem fibers. Very, very useful plant, but a bit invasive. And don't forget, you need to be quite quick about this, because tradition has it that come Michaelmas, the devil spits on them. In the polite version, he spits on them. The impolite version, he does something rather worse. And that's because when he fell from heaven, he landed in a bramble bush. So on Michaelmas, he goes round and curses all the blackberries and spits on them. Of course, Michaelmas used to be the 10th of October rather than the end of September. So you've got a few days with leeway if you go by the old dates. And to be honest, I've never set much store by it. You can find perfectly good blackberries later in the season, and it all depends on the season, as the crop does. So blackberries, we're getting to the end of it, but get out there, you'll still find some lovely fruit to harvest. Elderberries are another good one. They very obviously grow in these wonderful hanging bunches of red-black fruit. It's a feeble sort of tree, but unmistakable. When the bunch of fruit hangs down, the berries are ripe. Sorry, let's go back. You want to pick them before any of the berries have gone at all wrinkled or drippy. They're very very juicy, very wet fruits, really. And make sure that you take all of the stalk off, because it'll make anything that you're making them into rather bitter. So what you do is you hold the bunch up and you use a fork to sort of rake the berries off, and they'll all drop into a bowl and be perfectly usable then. It's not very tasty raw, but it's good as an extra fruit to put in with other fruits when you're making that mixed hedge jam. You can also make a sauce called Pontac sauce, which is elderberries and wine or vinegar and spiced and kept bottled, so it'll preserve almost forever. And this is one of the things that the sort of gentleman travellers carried around with them to make their whatever they found to eat taste a bit better. And of course, they're another one that's very good for you. They're high in antioxidants and very good for sore throats and things. There's you can make a syrup which is called elderberry rob, which we used to be dosed with if you had a cold or sore throat. You had a spoonful of this given to you, and it actually tastes a hell of a lot better than most of the cough and sore throat syrups you can buy over the counter. So worth making some just for that. Sloes are the fruit of the blackthorn, which is a very common hedgerow plant. They have the oval leaves. The flower comes out before the leaf in the spring and comes and covers the hedges in this wonderful white blossom. And it has lots and lots of very long thorns. So watch out for them, because any wound from them tends to fester. So be very careful. I find picking gloves almost impossible, but the thorns are quite obvious and easy to avoid if you're a bit careful. This is the one that's really going to snag your plastic bag. They have a small, round, dark blue fruit with a sort of paler bloom on it. So they've got this sort of, looks as if they've been dusted. If you eat one raw, it really pulls your mouth together. They're incredibly sharp. But they do say if you leave them until they've been frosted, they'll sweeten. They still don't taste very good raw, to be honest. And you can always pick them and pop them in the freezer in a bag, just overnight, which will have the same effect. They're one of the ancestors of domestic plums, but the flesh is drying in your mouth. If you find one that the fruit is large and sweeter, it's a thing called a Bullis, and they're quite usable as instead of a damson. But these fellas are like mouth-puckeringly sour. They make a very good jelly though, and you can also make sloe gin or vodka, which is absolutely brilliant. And to make that, you need to prick the skins of the fruit, and the tradition is you should do it with a thorn off bush that you pick the fruit from. I find a sharp tine fork is actually much easier, or even a cocktail stick. And then you pop them in a jar, and you put some sugar on, and you top it up with gin or vodka, and leave it as long as you can possibly resist it. You leave it on the fruit for about 3 months, so you're decanting it just before Christmas, and you can try a bit then. But if you keep it for a couple of years, the flavours really develop. Very tasty fruit to use, but don't remember, you do need to cook it. Crab apples are a fabulous thing. Now, of course, this is not the ancestor of our domestic apples. Those were came from Kazakhstan rather than this country, but crab apples are native to the country, and they're known as the wilding tree in Shropshire. It's a wonderful name, isn't it? They're very variable. They're often used as a decorative feature, ornamental varieties, which have quite red fruits, and they're all can be used in exactly the same way. So watch out on hedges and heaths rather than in woodland, because they do need light, and they're very sharp tasting when they're raw. So they make a beautiful coloured jelly though, and they're very good for adding pectin to all those other fruits that are a bit lacking in it, and also to bulk them out. So you can make a jelly with elderberries and crab apples, or sloes and crab apples, and you'll be sure of a really good set, because that's what you need the pectin for, and a lovely colour and brightness. The taste tends to be rather overwhelmed by whatever you put in with them, so use them as a bulker and for the pectin. They were once used to make something called lamb's wool, which was an Elizabethan drink, which was a mixture of hot ale, roasted crabapple pulp, and a bit of sugar and spice. Was referred to in Shakespeare. And this is a way of making crabapple whiskey, which you would do in the same way as the sloe gin, only using whiskey and, in this case, rather small crab apples. I'm not quite sure whether it was the best thing to do with them, but you never know. It's worth a try. Everything's worth a try. Hawthorn bushes, of course, another one very common in our hedgerows. These were the quickthorn. These were the chosen, easily grown thorn hedging plant that they used during the enclosures. It grew quickly just from setting a twig of it in the ground, and makes a good thorny impenetrable barrier, much like the blackthorn does, except that the blackthorn is prone to sucker and spreads out into your field. So hawthorn was preferred. So there's lots and lots of it about. It has very abundant sort of smoky red berries, but it's a rather dry fruit. So you need to add those crab apples and simmer it for a long, long time to get the flavour out of the hawthorns, the hawberries. The jelly's nice on toast, but it's also very good on with cream cheese. Or you can use it with a meats that you would traditionally use cranberry jelly, sort of lambs and things like this. There's two types. There's a common hawthorn that most of us know that has one pip in it, and the Midland hawthorn. So if you squish one, it's got two pips in it. It's a Midland hawthorn. Apparently, the flesh of it, if you eat it raw, tastes rather like sweet potato, but I have to admit, I've never really found that. And what with the dryness and the pip, they're not terribly satisfactory raw, but make a very good jelly, and it's a lovely colour. Rosehips, of course, is the fruit of the wild roses, dog roses. Famous as a forage fruit. They have these orangey red, sort of elongated fruits, which was used in the Middle Ages in desserts. They're fiddly to prepare, though. During World War I, housewives were encouraged to make rosehip jam, but to make a jam out of them, you have to very carefully gut each hip. It's got a lot of seeds and a lot of little tiny hairs in it. And we used to use the hairs out of them as itching powder when we were kids. A little pinch of that stuffed down somebody's jumper. Absolutely brilliant, wonderful. But you don't want to eat it. The hairs around the seeds can be a dangerous internal irritant. So really, the making jam and desserts out of them, they were very fiddly, and really the end result probably wasn't worth it. During World War II, though, the lack of oranges and lemons and things led to a bit of a crisis for vitamin C, particularly in children. So they encouraged the gathering. They had a government scheme to encourage the gathering of rosehips. And about 450 tons of the things were picked annually, usually by schools and scout packs and Girl Guide packs and that sort of thing. And they were paid by the government by weight for their rosehips. So it was a bit of a money spinner for them. And it brought in all those lovely rosehips, which were then commercially processed and made rosehip syrup, which is about 70 milligrams of vitamin C per fluid ounce. A huge amount, much more than orange juice. You can make it yourself quite easily. Bottle it in small bottles, because it doesn't keep well once it's opened. You can use the syrup, you can take it on a spoonful just for your vitamin C, or you can use it as a flavouring in milk puddings and ice creams and things, or dilute it as a drink. Of course, a lot of the ornamental roses have much bigger hips. These are Rosa rugosa, which have a particularly fat, lovely dark red hips. It's a really, really big, juicy looking thing. The flavour isn't quite so good. but it's still got all those vitamins in it. So if you really can't be bothered with all those tiny little pips, go for the bigger ones. And they'll stay on the plant. The dog rose hips will stay on the plant well into the winter, so plenty of time. And it doesn't really matter when you pick them if they're a bit squishy or hard as nails. They'll go equally well. You have to cook them slowly, and don't forget to sieve them to get all those little hairs out. Now, here's one of my favourites. This is the rowan tree, mountain ash. And this is a tree of dry woods and rocky places, but also these days of roadsides and car parks, because it's very pretty. It has that lovely white blossom in the spring, and then the dripping with red berries and red leaves in the autumn. So very popular as an amenity tree. It's quite a small tree. It's got those toothed leaflets on pinnate leaves, so one on the end and two on either side of the stalk, and they're pretty unmistakable. They've got these fabulous bunches of orange red fruit looking really, really good. And you want to pick them around October when they're fully ripe, but before they go too mushy. And you want to cut off the clusters whole, and then you can, a bit like the elderberries, you can rake the fruit off the stalks, because again, you don't want to eat the stalks. People are going to look a bit odd if you start chopping great lumps out of the roadside trees, but they're not difficult to find. And if you're very keen on them, you can always grow one in the garden and keep the witches away too. They make a really nice dark orange jelly with a sharp flavour. Again, you want those crab apples for the pectin. And that one goes very well with game, with pheasant or venison or something like that, or with lamb. Use it instead of cranberry or red currant jellies. And it's a bit different. It's a bit interesting. It gives you a bit of a talking point at your dinner party. Here's one that you probably wouldn't think of trying. This is Gelder Rose. It's a pretty small tree. It's got sort of maple-shaped leaves which turn a flaming red in the autumn, and rather sticky red fruit. It always looks as if you touched it, it would be tacky. It'll make you really sick if you eat it raw. And I spent quite a lot of time thinking, well, if it makes you sick when you eat it raw, I don't think I really want to eat it as even cooked. But in actual fact, it makes a really nice jelly and is perfectly safe once it's cooked. But pick them when they've gone a bit soft. These ones are no good if they're really, really hard. It's not a very common tree around the place, but it's worth looking out for. Sometimes again planted as a roadside tree. And another really unusual one. This is wild service tree. It's also known as checkers. It's a relative of the rowan, the mountain ash, and it's got sort of jagged, mapley looking leaves again. You only find it on calcareous soils. So if you live close to Wenlock Edge or the Llanflas Hills, you might find one. They tend to crop up in ancient woodlands, rather a scarce thing. But it has these strange greeny brown to russet brown, rather oblong looking berries. And it's worth a try if you find one. I mean, just nibble one or two. It needs to be frosted before you eat it, or ever so slightly rotted, what they call bletted. And once it's in that condition, it makes a nice wayside snack. It's considered that it's rather sweet and date-like fruit. They used to be given to children as sweeties and sold in bunches, which people would then string up along their fire surround, so they properly ripened, and then they could watch them, and when they got a little bit started to go over, they could eat them, and they have that sort of rich date-like flavour. Very unusual one, but it's always worth looking out. You can sometimes find these things in the weirdest places. The nuts are another fabulous autumn harvest. Usually I find the squirrels have got them before I do. Hazelnuts are ripe once you can move them in their little papery, leaky cup. Squirrels are quite fit to eat them before they're ripe, though, so hard to get hold of, but obviously fabulous if they do. And these were an important crop because they produce oil. Very few vegetable sources of oil you can get in this country, and nuts were one of them. They used to eat them by the ton, the Neolithic people onwards to the Elizabethans. When we dug up the Globe Theatre in London, obviously where Shakespeare's stages plays, the floor was littered with hazelnut shells. It was what people had as a snack food, where you might take a bag of sweeties or chocolates or something. Elizabethans would take a bag of hazelnuts, and while they watched the play, they would munch on them. And if they didn't like the play, they would throw them at the stage. So, great history of hazelnuts in this country. Other ones that are pretty good are the sweet chestnuts, because these aren't they're not a native tree, but there's plenty of them around, and you don't always get decent nuts out of them. The one in the picture here looks nice and fat and glossy, and that's how you want them. But quite often you'll open up that prickly hedgehog-like husk and just find 2 or 3 little rather flat bits, and they're no use at all. But if you get nice big fat ones, they make really good snacks if you roast them and salt them, or you can make sweet chestnut flour. And it's available commercially. So if you want to try them without all that hassle, or if you can't find enough nuts and you just want to have a little go with them, you can buy the flour and see what it's like. It's rather sweet tasting flour. Beech mast is also quite edible, but again, not always growing to a sort of nice, fat, plump nut. They tend to be rather sporadic with their fruiting. So one year you'll get a really good crop of them, and then maybe for the next 2 or 3 years, you won't get anything. Similar to that is the acorns, and I'm sure everybody's always told you that acorns are poisonous, but they're not. They need leaching, though. There are tannins in them that makes them harmful if you eat them raw, but if you soak them in water, peel them first, soak them in water, then pour away the water, soak them again, pour away the water, till the water runs nice and clear, you'll have got rid of all that nasty bitterness. And in wartime, they were used to make a substitute for coffee. You can make a flour out of them, or you could roast them whole as a snack, or make a sort of acorn brittle instead of peanut brittle out of them. And they're really quite tasty. And one year in 3 or 4, they'll be really abundant, huge crops of them, and it might be worth trying a few. Do make sure you've looked into how to leach them properly, though. You can either leach them whole, particularly if you want to make something like the sort of acorn brittle out of them, or roasted nuts, and in that case you do it with cold water. If you want to grind them up to make them into flour or something, you can use boiling water, which will make the process a little quicker. But it's worth a go. It's a different taste, if nothing else. And again, think about amazing the people at that dinner party. While I was researching this, I read a fantastic book by Alice Fowler called The Urban Foraging. Called The Thrifty Forager, and it's about urban foraging. And the fruits that you get from roadside trees and growing around school grounds and university campuses and parks, you could be amazed how much you could find. And she goes into eating things that it would never occur to me to even try. But if you think about it, all of these plants that we're growing in our parks and gardens and car parks and things, they're somebody else's wild food. They're their equivalent of the blackberry or the dragonberry or something. So just have a look at a few of those. Wherever they came from, they're somebody's foraging, so it's always possible. This is a Chinese bramble, and you quite often see this one in car parks. It's a ground cover plant. It's very low growing, evergreen leaves, and has these rather obvious red berries. And they do stay, they stay red. They don't go black, these ones. It's got these red bristles on it that are soft to the touch, so it's not like a blackberry. Bright orange, red, raspberry-like fruit. They hang down. They tend to be rather hidden by the foliage. So you have to sort of look a bit furtive in the car park, peeping under the leaves and things. And Alice suggests eating them straight from the bush because they're very sweet and they fall apart when you pick them. Now, I'm not awfully sure how much I fancy the idea of eating something that's grown in Sainsbury's car park. A lot of traffic fumes there. And, she's saying you don't even want to wash the thing because it's going to fall apart. So I'm not sure about this one. It's up to you. If you can find one that's somewhere like on a university campus or school fields or a park that has been used as ground cover, it might be a little bit safer. But I'd pick the ones from the middle of the patch. It's all those places they dog walk, Just an idea. Fuchsias are another interest. This is fascinating, isn't it? Fuchsias, apparently, they have those wonderful fruits, are actually quite edible. The fruit is described as tasting rather odd, a little like watery honey with a peppery twist. It's best when it's gone really dark to a dark purplish red, and they go a little soft. So pick them when they've gone a bit squishy. Apparently they're delicious with ice cream. That'd be vanilla ice cream, of course, obviously. And apparently they can make a very good jam as well. So if you've got one in your garden, why not give it a go? It'll be interesting if nothing else. This is Mahonia. This is another very common shrub in parks and gardens. And it's one that has the rather holly looking leaves and those rather acid yellow flowers. And it also has rather good fruits. And these are known in America as the Oregon honey grape. So this is their wild forest fruit. And it makes a deeply dark jelly. So tart and sweet at the same time. The trick is to process them really quickly. And do add that crabapple for the pectin. They stain everything, so be warned on that one. Especially if you're taking your children foraging and they've got the pink frock on, This is a very popular 70s shrub was the Japanese quince. They have these wonderful red flowers, and they can grow up walls or make a little hedge in themselves. And the flowers come from red to sort of apricot and pink, rather an attractive thing. And the fruits can be anything from green to purpley green to quite yellow. And you can treat these as you would a proper quince, except of course they're very much smaller, so you're going to need more of them. If you stew it with apple, it's good with vanilla ice cream again, or yogurt or something like that. Or you can make a jelly or quince paste, membrillo out of them. I mean, jelly is rather an insipid colour from these yellow fruits, but not like the golden colour that you get with a true quince. But the taste is pretty good. This one's been made with star anise, so you can always pop in a bit of something like that to improve the flavour a bit. And finally, this is Barbary or Berberis, which is a small shrub. It has bright orange flowers in the springtime, and it's a dark blue with the bit of sort of dusty bloom to it again, and the very chewy seeds. So if you don't like chewy seeds, and quite a lot of us don't, let's face it, put them through a sieve or a moolie or something like that. You can dry these to make a snack food, or use them in puddings and jams and leathers, or just eat them raw. Uh, Alice suggests there should be a snack before you head into the supermarket. I've already told you what I think about that. Whatever you do, though, do get out there and do a bit of gathering. It's just the perfect time of year for it. It makes you feel like you're preparing for winter. And just think of those lovely jams you can make. Think how good they're going to look sitting on your store shelf. If you're interested in the recipes and information about how to use these things, you can email me. My address is at the bottom there, and I will send you an electric PDF version of my autumn foraging handout. And it has pages and pages and pages of the best recipes I've found. So that's always worth it. It's a good start, but do look out in books and online as well. The books I would recommend first is Richard Mabey's Food for Free. It's a standard from the 70s, absolutely brilliant book. You really can't do better than that. It goes through just about everything. And if you want an inspirational book, try John Lewis Semple's The Wild Life. He actually spent a year living on food that he could catch or forage on his own farm. So that's a good inspiration rather than instructions. And don't forget, we want to keep all these places that you can go and gather fruit in. So there's a lot of stuff out there, both for us and for the wildlife. We want to look after it properly. And one of the best ways you can do that is to join the Wildlife Trust. So have a think about it. As always, your silly fact for this week is that a kilogram of fresh blackberries from any of the major supermarkets would cost you more than 4 months standard membership of Shropshire Wildlife Trust. So have a think about it. You can join online. Don't forget to say that this is where you saw your you were inspired, but be inspired mainly to go out and taste the autumn. Have a try of it all. Make some lovely preserves, have a nibble of the fruit, and feel at one with nature and with all the things that are preparing for winter out there. Go and prepare for winter with them. Thank you very much.